Hello, everyone. I'm Harini Calamur, and I head Impact Science. We essentially look at how best can we communicate research better. And today, what we are doing is we are looking at a discussion where we look at how scholarly publishers across the world, across disciplines, across areas, are using digital and social to communicate their research across the board. With me on the panel is John Pescatore from Academy of Management. There is Sonia Kolasinska from Elsevier. There is Dominque from Brill. There is Thomas Wang, who has joined us by phone from Wiley, China. And there's me. Okay. So before I start and give you set context on the panel, I would like each of my panelists to introduce themselves and what they do and how they use social and digital. John, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is John Pescatore. I am the Managing Director of Publications and Content for the Academy of Management. The Academy of Management is based out of Briarcliff Manor, New York. We're the leading organization behind management and organization scholarship in the US. We've been around since 1936. We have 20,000 plus members. We also have I believe it's the world's largest management and organizational scholarship meeting every year, which comprises of about 10 to 15,000 individuals. This year, obviously, was a little bit more complicated. That meeting has been canceled. It was scheduled in August in Vancouver, but obviously due to the current situation, that was not possible. We are looking at doing a virtual type of a meeting around that same time. Our organization exists to better the community around management scholarship and to bring that scholarship to a broad audience of individuals. So scholars, academics, obviously, and also business practitioners. We do that through our top-ranked journals. We have 5 top-ranked journals in the area of management. We have 2 proceedings products, which are geared around our annual meeting and then smaller global conferences we have. And our new product, which I will talk about a little bit later, is AOM Insights. And what Insights does, it was launched about 2 years ago to our membership. We're still awaiting a wider launch. It takes the academic content that we publish and puts it in summaries for business practitioners. So sort of along the lines of Harvard Business Review, and et cetera. The difference between us and Harvard Business Review and a number of other publishing houses and smaller organizations that do similar contents is that we create our summaries based off of evidence. So findings that our scholars present within our journals are summarized. It's not someone's opinion. It's not based on conjecture. It's based on evidence. So I'm glad to be here today. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Our social and digital role has expanded recently, both within our launch of Insights and also we have engaged for the first time an external PR firm to help us with our social media channels. That happened about 1.5 years ago. So we've made some very drastic changes and some significant steps within both social and digital, both with our with the enabling of our PR firm and obviously work that we're currently doing with Editage around our digital media. So I'll go into a little bit more of that in detail later, but it's great to join you and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, John. Dominque, can I ask you to introduce yourself? Dominque is from Brill.
So my name is Dominque Dureau. I'm the Global Marketing Director at Brill. Brill is a publishing house in the humanities. We exist 337 years this year. We publish mainly in the humanities, social sciences, and international law. And we're really a global publisher. We have our main office in Leiden, but we also have offices in Boston, in Beijing, in Singapore, and one in Paderborn, Germany. And we publish different product types. We publish 1,400 books each year, including an increasing number in open access. We have over 300 journals, and we also publish a lot of databases, such as major reference works, bibliographies, primary sources, dictionaries, and scholarly editions on digital platforms that all have their own functionality. So that's just to give you a little bit of background to me and to Brill. Okay, back to you, Harini.
Thank you. Sonia Kolasinska is with Elsevier, and she looks after this entire space as well, which is digital and social. Sonia, can you introduce yourself and what you do?
So my name is Sonia Kolasinska. I work for Elsevier in the digital and social media space, as Harini mentioned, especially for science, technology, and medicine journals. So Elsevier is a global information analytics business, and we specialize in science and health. And what I do on a daily basis is reaching out to authors, researchers, and help them publish in our journals, also open access, of course.
And finally, we have with us Thomas Wang, who is with Wiley, China. Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes. Would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Wang from Wiley, China. I'm the marketing director based in Wiley Beijing office. I have been in this industry, publishing industry, for over 17 years, and with Wiley 7 years, leading library marketing, author marketing, and also the journal marketing to cover the China mainland. I'm very glad to be part of this virtual event today, and I wish this event very successful. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we start with the conversation, let me just set some context as far as what we're going to be discussing today. This is the conference, and these are our wonderful panelists. But essentially, what we are seeing in the world across the board is an explosion in digital and social. It's all over the place, even before the lockdown. This is a slide I pulled up from the consumption patterns of people over the last 2 years. If you look at the amount that's consumed in a minute, it is humongous. It's seriously humongous. Part of it is professionally produced content, but the other part is also user-generated content. And what we have been seeing over the last few years is the move more and more towards professional content that's getting consumed more and more. And researchers, academics, everybody is a part of this ecosystem. They are also on these platforms. They're also consuming content. They're also producing content. So what you're seeing here is a twofold phase: a humongous increase in the production of content and an even bigger explosion in the consumption of content. So even if you look at our area, which is academic publishing, what you see is, again, a humongous growth in the amount of academic papers being produced on a year-on-year basis. I just drew up two interesting data points yesterday. I searched for two topics on Google Scholar. One was on COVID. And in a 4-month period, there are over 200,000 records on Google Scholar. So you can just look at the volume of output that's being produced across the world. And then I picked up my old favorite, which is epigenetics, okay, which is, and there are about 334,000 records there. Now, the question is this: how do you find the right research? How do you, if you are the researcher, how do you communicate your research amidst all this clutter? How do you break through the clutter, and how do you reach out to the audiences that you want to read your paper, be it peers who can take the research forward, be it funders who want to know what you've done with your research, be it policymakers, be it general public? How do you do that? And I think this is where communicating research becomes very crucial, and this is what digital and social platforms help us do. If you look at the world 5 years ago, the academic world 5 years ago, there was just maybe 1 or 2 metrics as far as academic impact was concerned. One of them was citations, and the other, to a certain extent, was download of papers. Now, this is the alt metric for 2 very different papers. One is on rubella and the impact of vaccines and autism, which is, I think, one of the highest ranked papers as per alt metric. And the other is on how honest people are across the world if they find a wallet left behind. One is from economics, the other is from medicine. And if you look at the tab at the top, what you will see is the impact of the paper is not just citations, it's not just downloads. It's how many times has news articles mentioned it, how many people have blogged about it, how many times has it been tweeted, how many times has it appeared on Wiki? Are people discussing it on Reddit? Is it popular parlance, and so on? We see this a lot with COVID, but it's not just COVID. This has been a trend for the last very many years in terms of research moving out of the academic ecosystem and moving into the more mainstream space. One of the things that definitely helps communicating research is alternate forms of content. So if you look at what kind of alternate forms, at the first level, what we find is text itself helps. Academic language tends to be very precise. It tends to be very structured. It's also a certain form that most people won't understand. And at the first level, can we actually translate it to plain language, English, plain language, German, plain language, Hindi, Chinese, whatever, and make it more popular? The second is, as John pointed out earlier, press releases around articles. Those definitely help in terms of being able to make the research reach the mainstream. And the third is a whole bunch of blogs around content that's being written, which can reside on your platform, it can reside on other platforms, but text itself works extremely well. The second is, can you do visual representations of your content? Can you show your content? Can you show your research in the form of an infographic or a graphical abstract? Maybe it's just key learnings, maybe it is just the concept. But does that help capture imagination? Can it cut through the clutter and make somebody interested in your research? That could be somebody who takes the research to the next level. The third is, of course, videos, which also work. Can you concise a 9-page paper into a 2-minute video? Can you create a policy video that talks to ministers and bureaucrats? Can you tell people about the impact of your research? And of course, finally, there are social media conversations that happen. So if you look at, this is something I picked out yesterday when I was preparing for the panel. And what you see over here is researchers not just talking about their area, researchers talking about science in general, researchers suddenly becoming more accessible to the public, researchers putting out opinions which they don't normally do. And that's, again, what is interesting. So what we are hoping to do at the end of this panel is to look at the practical nature of digital transformation, especially that which happens with respect to social interaction and scholarly collaborative networks. Gain a bit of knowledge about how social strategies can guide and in some cases drive the research discussion itself. And of course, actual strategies that are being used by every one of the people on this panel to engage with the research community, with authors and so on. So I will start with my first question, which is to look at how and why digital and social platforms are transforming academic publishing with reference to each of the panelists' area of work. Dominic, can we start with you and humanities?
For the humanities, I think as in other areas, we've seen this digital transformation already for the past 25 years, but it's accelerated a lot in the last few years, and especially I think in this times of COVID-19. And for the humanities, I think we're a bit different from STM in the sense that STM really was a driving factor because it was very journals focused, and the journals business, I think, went over to digital format a bit quicker than monographs books. And I think in recent years, we've really seen a transformation also for the books. So that has been a really big change for Brill as well, that you now see that there are a lot of universities that are focusing on acquiring ebooks, and that there are a lot of researchers that are now using ebooks to do their research, and you can really instantly have access to your research. So that has created a huge leap in platforms for ebooks and journals. And for us, we're really a publisher that also publishes a lot of different types of product types. We also publish reference works and primary sources. And they each, what we've seen in the recent years is that they each develop their own type of platform. So on the primary sources platform, you have a completely different type of functionality than on the bibliographies platform, for example. And that has really accelerated. And what I see in the future years, if I look at what our operations department is developing right now and what we're working on in our publishing units with researchers, that I think will be launched in the future years, is also a lot more visual research. So take, for example, historical research. what I can see happening is that we're now looking at how you can create 3D visualizations of, for example, 17th century houses, where you can add different research layers, and you can really walk through that house. So you're standing in this 3D animation of a 17th century house. You can walk through it, and you can click on an object that you're seeing. Perhaps you're seeing a table, or perhaps you're seeing a map on the wall. You click on it, and you get the background to that item, and that is all filled by layers of data coming from historical archives. And I think that's a completely new way of doing research and also engaging with research. And I think that will take a big flight within the humanities in the next couple of years.
That sounds absolutely fascinating, Dominique, especially the virtual walkthrough of spaces from the past. John, how does it impact management education?
I think one of the biggest impacts for management education is it's helped us as an organization become more of a team player with our authors and to present our authors with the variables that we didn't present to them before. So, for example, like Dominique had discussed, we're a little different in that we sit within the humanities and social sciences and not STM. Not to say that we don't have evidence-based decisions and articles, but for us, it's been, and for me, in my role, it's been really marrying up, the opportunities we give our authors to what systems we're developing to help our authors. So, for example, we're doing a lot more around video files and audio files that help supplement our content. Similar to what Dominique was saying in regards to, digital walkthroughs. We have a number of our authors now, and we're presenting with them the opportunity to do data visualization. So think about a management article that had a specific graph within it. Typically that graph would be presented within the print text and then put online. What we're now doing with our authors is looking at that graph as a data visualization rather than a flat graph. So the author is sending us the content, the table, and then giving us the research that went into that content, so that that graph, as it goes online, becomes a movable target to the data variables and the sets that were included in that graph. So if the y-axis had 10 to 15 users, you could then go into that graph and change it to 20 to 35 to see how that impacts the research. So that's one different thing that we're doing with our authors. Insights is another. When I launched Insights about 2 years ago, it was done off of the context of providing that service to our members and to our authors. Our authors are continuously looking at different ways to disseminate their content. And that was extremely helpful, not only to them, because they were being asked to do it anyway from secondary sources not affiliated with the AOM. But then what we found out was, as we started to create our digital strategy and our social media strategy, the two were very similar to each other. So we couldn't create a summary type of a product to our academic text without having the mechanism to push it out to a wider audience. And those summaries, those edited videos that we're doing, the research shorts, the infographics that we're creating, they all help support our wider digital social strategy. Because we don't, we're a small publisher as far as compared to the Wileys and the Elseviers. So anytime that we could help build secondary and supplementary content around our articles, that becomes a mechanism for us to reach out to different audiences more frequently. So before, where we had one single piece of content, a journal article that got promoted through social media once, now we have a journal article that gets promoted to social media, an infographic that is aligned with that article, a research brief that's aligned with that article. So there's 300% more content from one single article that we can then use to disseminate out to not only our members, but now to wider audiences. So business practitioners and someone who would want to look at an article, and perhaps they don't have a PhD in management and they can't truly understand 60 pages of academic text. Well, now they can have a one-page summary with an infographic that says, hey, you don't really need to technically understand everything that the author wrote. Here are how you could take these pieces of content and manage people better. And that's been extremely helpful with us.
That's quite fascinating, the entire bridge, when digital acts as a bridge between, say, the practitioner and the theoretician, John. And Sonia, how has your experience been?
Yes, Harini. I totally agree with John. It definitely changed the way that we as a publisher communicate the research that is published. So indeed, disseminating the research in many different new forms, new visual forms like video, like infographics and blog posts, for example. And that has definitely changed the visibility of that research, I think. But the communication that comes from the publisher to the outside world is a big part of that communication, but it's not everything, right? Now with social media, the researchers themselves, the authors, can also promote the research to audiences that they haven't had a chance to reach before. So what we've seen a lot with Elsevier is that whenever an author publishes in one of our journals, they spread the word through Twitter or through Facebook, tagging not only people that they've worked with or universities that they've worked with, but also societies, also institutions, or even policy makers that might be interested in that research. And I think if those institutions then pick up that piece of content and share it wider with their team, I mean, it's brilliant for especially for dissemination of that research. So I think that digital transformation has really given the power to authors themselves to really influence which networks they activate for themselves.
Absolutely, and you're seeing a lot of author traction on all these social networks, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And John, Thomas, do you see this in China as well? Do you see authors using social and digital to disseminate? Tell us about the China ecosystem and how academic publishing is using digital and social there.
Yes, I think we currently have a lot of the use of the social and digital marketing, especially under this coronavirus impact. Or China marketing, we are focused on shifting from the traditional marketing to digital marketing driven. We have developed our digital marketing strategy, and a lot of new initiatives, innovative thoughts are implemented or being implemented. That's my input.
Mm-hmm. But how are authors using, let's say, a WeChat? How are publishers using, let's say, for example, a WeChat?
So far, I think the WeChat in China for Wiley, for example, is the main portal that we engage and influence our researchers and authors. We also partnered, for example, with some external platform company, technology company, who can help us to build like an app or tool to run the author profiling based on WeChat. So we can better understand author behavior in this virtual world, so that we can run targeted campaigns, engagement programs, for example, workshop, webinar, to better meet the author needs and requests.
That makes absolute sense. So I think that what's interesting here is how is the digital and social landscape? How is it impacting, let's say, author behavior and researcher outreach? And in turn, how is this transforming the entire academic landscape? I mean, do you see a difference, let's say, for example, between older researchers and how they use digital and social? And let's say maybe early career researcher and how they use digital and social. Shall we start with you, Sonia, on this?
Yes, thank you, Harini. We definitely see the difference. I think the young researchers are really driving and challenging publishers to be more digitally savvy and to have all our solutions, starting from web through social media, but also the tools that they're using in the research that we provide work seamlessly and work on different devices. I think there's this expectation that they need to have access to all those tools on the go wherever they are, and there shouldn't be any interruptions. So that's more from like a technical perspective. I also think that the digital landscape now really shifts the attention to sort of what impact in a society the research really has. So Harini, you just mentioned a few minutes ago altmetrics, right? And I think that's something that's a new way of measuring the impact of the research that we've seen in the last years. So, for example, for us, all the authors who publish in our journals are able then to see through Plamix tool the metrics of how is the research shared, how many websites and which websites, for example, news websites, pick up the research and write about it. How many and Twitter how many Twitter mentions the research had and from whom exactly. So they can really assess the depth and the width of the impact of the research. And I think that's really powerful and really empowering also for authors.
Okay, and John, do you see that a similar kind of what Sonia was mentioning about younger authors, about the bridge between younger authors and newer authors? Are you seeing a similar kind of trend in management publishing?
Absolutely. Our author base, as it gets younger, they're more likely, our younger authors are more likely to come to us and say, hey, I submitted an article and I went on your website, I saw your insights product, I saw that the summary has an infographic. How do I engage with you to have that service done for me? Or how can you guide me if you don't provide that service to having something like that done? And it's also, there's another variable to it also. What we're seeing is that to some extent, the involvement that authors want to have with us to create those secondary dissemination mechanisms, to some extent play on how valuable their universities find them, as far as tenure decisions, reaching new markets. So as that possibility develops, I think we're going to get asked to engage with more authors. Not every article that gets submitted to us has the benefit of having a summary made of it or an infographic. But we're already seeing trends within certain organizations where an author from a specific university will approach us to have that done, because it is something that the university recognizes as a legitimate academic work, and then supplementary material that, while might be more difficult, it does talk to their content reaching different audiences. And some universities still value that more than others. Obviously, all universities still look at the main academic variables of impact factor and citations. But as those universities develop more criteria around supporting their authors, there's a direct relationship between that, and it might just be the management field of, hey, I want to be able to take advantage of these different types of content pieces to help support my articles. And the value of us as an organization of tying that into our digital strategy is that the authors see this immediately. Our summaries and our infographics are made literally, they're created a month or less after the article has been put in our in-press mechanism, which is our mechanism to get articles out before they go into volume and issue. And a lot of our authors, whether junior or older scholars, those that are adept in social media, take those pieces that we create and push them out through their own channels as well. And what we've seen is that has helped us, because it's kind of created what we've wanted to do for a long time within our members, is create this secondary channel of what we call subject matter experts within certain fields. So if someone's writing a lot about entrepreneurship and they've been on a number of different panels and they're highly cited, and they send us an article that gets a summary and an infographic, and we're actually putting them through a mechanism now where our press, the individuals we work with on our press side will work with that individual, and that individual becomes a subject matter expert. And they sit on panels, they have conversations with media, and they're promoting the Academy as far as what value we gave to them as an author. And sometimes it's around content that they've published with other publishers. They don't necessarily, authors don't need to publish necessarily with us to be, to be a member, first of all, and to be recognized as a subject matter expert, because we realized even if they're not publishing with us, we need to have them benefit. We need to have them, represent us as an organization to get out who we are as an organization. And, all that combined has really helped us. It's helped our authors. But absolutely, the trend is that younger authors are more inclined to ask for this, but it's also, those individuals who are social media savvy are not the same individuals who weren't 10 or 15 years ago. And the age of that, a lot of individuals who are senior scholars really know the benefit of social media and pushing out content through social media. So that started to change too.
So what I'm hearing from both you and Sonia are two terms. One is impact, and the impact the paper makes in the larger space. And the second one is a certain democratization of the entire process of dissemination and communication. Would I be right in saying this? Do you find this a similar thing do you find a similar trend in humanities, Dominque?
Yes, I agree with that. I think you're not only seeing perhaps differences between ages, but also across different subjects. I think there is a different sort of cultural preference between different subject areas for different social media. So in some areas, Twitter might be very popular, and in others, academia or Facebook. And I think, of course, there are some authors that are very social media savvy, and they teach others. But I think authors also really know those circles themselves really well. And I think we as publishers also have a role to play in teaching scholars and how to use these items. So using webinars and trainings, for example, but also making it really easy for them, showcasing them, well, these are all of the different options you have. You have the infographic, you have the short summary, and the video and the podcast, and we can help you to create all of these materials. And this is how you do it. And these are all the places that you can think of, and then guiding them through that network. I think that is really where our role comes in now, that we really have to support authors in that.
Thank you so much, Dominque. And Thomas, I'm really curious about how it works in China. With China, in the last 10 years, I'm seeing a lot of traction on platforms like WeChat and author presence there. Also platforms like DXY. Is that widespread? Is the use of social and digital by academics, young academics, older academics, is that really widespread in China?
Yes, you are correct. Actually, by social media, we engage the early career researcher communities, and we also explore the partnership with some external leading social media platform by subject areas. For example, you mentioned the DXY, and some other leading communities in material science, for example, chemistry, etc. So we partner them. So, for example, we will run some large-scale live webcasting programs, seminars. So by our recent event, or one event, we attracted about 50,000 audience for a journal special issue event. I think that's the first case with Wiley in the past 7-8 years. Thirdly, we run virtual event, and we really attract a lot of audience, receive a lot of feedbacks. So it gave us a big confidence in how to engage, influence our researchers through social media, through some new platform. I saw some audience. Also, Dawn just mentioned the TikTok. In China, we call it the Douyin. We also some other platform like Bilibili. It's very active and innovative in China.
So do researchers really put out their research on TikTok?
No, I'm just mentioning about TikTok. We partnered with Bilibili. It's a live webcasting video social platform.
Okay.
A lot of young generation very active on the platform. So we conducted a virtual event, and it was web broadcasted through Bilibili. So total we attracted about that number of audience for one event.
Okay, that makes sense. So essentially what I'm seeing over here is a common trend. Mostly younger, but not restricted to only younger. Some savvy older researchers are using social media very effectively and digital very, very effectively. And publishers are using these media platforms to reach out to them. The question, one question which I have here for each of you, and maybe it can be a very quick answer. Does that make a researcher who's only engrossed in research and not dissemination, does that put them at a disadvantage? John?
I don't think so, because from our perspective, even our researchers that are really engrossed in research recognize that there needs to be an output for that research. And, how do we as an organization, again, like I mentioned, not every article that gets to us gets an infographic or a summary, but we still are in the business of disseminating that content out, that research content, as widely as possible. So, for example, our insights product is more along the lines of our evidence-based journals. Our theory-based journals don't really fit as well within insights because they're not evidence-based. It's more theory-driven. But that doesn't mean that we don't help support those authors in different ways to get their content out there. It's just not the same mechanism that some of our other content would be. So I'm not necessarily sure that a strict sit down, do the researcher isn't still looking for the dissemination channel within our journal, or maybe it's a different type of a channel outside of the journal. But I think there's still an opportunity there for us as an organization to look at not only what we've already created to help disseminate work, but maybe different avenues that are more appropriate for different types of research.
Interesting. So one of my early experiences was when we were doing a project with a Japanese university. Some of the researchers telling us that we are serious researchers, we don't really want to take part in this dissemination. And then once they saw the success of the remaining articles, they began coming back to us. Dominique, do you face this in the humanities, which is quite serious?
Yeah, I think, of course, there is still the traditional way of dissemination, and there are lots of researchers that are using that. But at the same time, we were talking a while back about how universities measure success and altmetrics and citations. And I think that is impacted by what authors do themselves as well in their own networks. If you are really active on social media and finding the right networks to disseminate your research, that will have an impact on how your research is being read, on how often you are being quoted. So I think in that sense, researchers that aren't using this are at a disadvantage and could increase the impacts of their research if they're using this more. And I think that's where we play a role as well as publishers, that we have to make sure that we maximize the impact of the research that we publish by using all possible areas.
And thank you for that, Dominique. And Sonia, do you have to educate authors on this, on the need for social digital outreach?
No, I think there's a lot of help coming from publishers as well. We definitely have organized events before and have materials that are designed to help authors to know how they can leverage their own network, how they can leverage the network of their network, so how to really expand their reach. So there's definitely a lot of education going on there. And I, as John and Dominique also mentioned, a lot of the dissemination happens also through the marketing department of Elsevier. So I think it's indeed the balance between helping and using our expertise and our channels, which already have a very wide reach, to really leverage them to spread the research as much as possible, but also teach and educate authors to do the best that they can with their networks and their channels. So I think it's both indeed.
Okay. And Thomas, what's your experience of this in China? Do you have this entire divide between younger researchers who use social and digital to promote their work and the older researcher who says, no, my work belongs in the lab? Or is it more fluid there as well?
Yeah, actually, we profiled our researcher by early career researcher and established researcher. I think different researchers, they have really different demand in China. For early career researchers, they are growing. They are still growing in their career, and they want to publish their research with high impact journals, and they do wish publishers could help them to promote their research. Of course, social media is the main portal. It's like a channel, we promote. But we, based on this kind of request, I think for Wiley, recently some digital author product was developed by the product team. And we help them to produce more attractive content in audio, by video, or other formats. We promote those kind of products or content through social media, through other communities and platforms. I think by this kind of integrated solution, we can get better satisfaction from the early career researchers. That's my observation, my experience.
Okay, thank you for that, Thomas. And now this is the portion I think that most participants are looking forward to, where each of you showcases the best practices that you practice in terms of using social and digital for whatever else that you do. So shall we start with you, Dominique?
So this is part of our mission statement. We launched a campaign last year when we created a new mission, and we launched the Humanities Matter campaign, because one of the areas that we feel are really core to what we do is that we operate from a belief that the humanities and social sciences and international law are areas of scholarship vital for addressing today's global challenges. And that belief motivates us to offer the authors the best possible service and infrastructure to disseminate their research. This is really something that is driving our marketing strategy as well. So these two pillars of relevance, the relevance of our content and explaining that relevance, almost as a news agency about the research that we publish, and at the same time the service level to our authors. Those are really core to our marketing strategy. And one of the ways that we're doing that is that we launched a blog where we collect and collate all of the different content items that we create about the research that we publish. So in this blog, we publish podcasts, but also videos and interviews with our different authors. And we really try to zoom in into what makes this research relevant, what is the impact that this research has on the world, and why is it important? And it's not just intended for academics, but it's also meant to really engage a wider audience. And we feed this information then also to other social channels. So the blog is really the central hub, but we also share that in different areas. So this is an example slide of what our podcasts look at, what a blog post for the podcast look at, and an example of the type of information that we then share. So I was just mentioning that we have the central blog, but then we also try to be active in different social media to cover really all of the channels where our academics are also active. And we really stimulate academics and authors themselves to also share that within their own network. So the podcasts also have their own Spotify channel. They're available on Apple Podcasts and on Google Podcasts, and you can follow them. But we also make sure that these are shared on Twitter. We use LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and of course also the old school email campaigns. Those are also really important too, and web pages, and for China also WeChat as a medium. And then I was mentioning the second pillar within our marketing strategy is really service level to authors. And that is really core to our values as a company as well. And that is focusing much more on teaching authors about all of the digital possibilities. that we have. So one thing that we try to be very active in is open access, because that is quite a key thing within the humanities at the moment. We try to engage with authors on open access, on all of the possibilities that we provide for it, and how they can publish their work in open access, but also questions as how do you find funding? So we really try to create teaching materials that guide our authors and editors throughout the entire open access process. And I think that will become more and more important too in future years. And in addition to that, we just had a lot of discussion on do we need to teach authors how to use social media and digital strategies to disseminate their research. Well, this is an example of how we do that. We've partnered up with one of our partners is Kudos, and you probably know Kudos as a way of providing short descriptions of research, but we also work with them to provide a masterclass series where we really explain to our authors, well, this is how you approach that, and these are all the different media that you can look at, and these are the things that you have to keep in mind, and how you create content. So those are some of the ways that we really try to engage with our authors and editors, and guide them through this new digital world. And for some, that might some are much more savvy, and then you can dive more into it because they already have their own channels and perhaps already have a lot of followers. And for some, we start at the basics and really guide them through that entire process. But I think that is really key to what marketing departments need to do right now. That's so that is a really brief introduction into how Brill marketing is approaching that.
That's very, very interesting, Dominque. The very fact that what you're doing is creating content that disseminates the research, but also educating authors on how they can disseminate research on their own. If anybody here has any questions for Dominque, do post it in the Q&A section. We will answer all the questions at the end when we have a Q&A section. One question that just came up is how well received are the podcasts?
I think that is one of the types of content that we're really seeing that is growing quite quickly, and I think the more topical things are, the more bigger their audience becomes. One example is we just launched a new series, a sub-series of the Humanities Matter series that is about COVID-19 and how humanities research can also do research on, for example, how societies deal with that. We launched a web page for that, and we're launching podcast series for that. And we saw over 30,000 views for that campaign alone. So I think it really is about the relevance of the content and how you approach a wider community there. That is crucial to the impact and the dissemination.
Any other people who have questions for Dominque, do post it. We will address this in the Q&A session. Sonia, would you like to show us, would you like to tell us about the best practices at Elsevier?
Yes, so there's really many best practices, I would say, in the marketing department. And indeed, for us, at the heart of our mission is supporting authors and supporting researchers through the whole journey of publishing, either if they choose to publish open access or not. But sort of the two things that I wanted to highlight today, which I think relates very well to the topics, Harini, that you chose for today, is our Researcher Academy platform. And this is a platform, a free e-learning platform developed especially for early career researchers that help with every single stage of their publication journey and of their research career. So we realized that companies like ours have years of experience and know the ins and outs of the publishing industry, the funding bodies, the dissemination of research, promoting yourself on events like conferences and so on. And we wanted to share that knowledge with our early career researchers and support them through that journey. So that platform is a free platform. Researchers need to register, and then they get webinars and modules created by our global experts, and they also can get a lot of career guidance and advice there. So that's what we do, especially for younger researchers. And the second point I wanted to highlight is indeed the different content forms that we started to develop. So throughout the years, we realized, of course, that researchers, just like any of us, are also struggling with time constraints, and they're impacted by the change of attention span online. So the content that we develop for them also needs to adjust to that. So it's not enough to just announce certain things and post a lot of text and a lot of copy, because honestly, nobody has time or energy to go through all that and to see and see if there's any information that is relevant for them. So we need to make it as easy and as visually appealing as possible. So that's why we develop blog posts. I think it's very similar to what Dominque said, basically translating research into shorter form, more digestible, on the go, on the mobile device, and we disseminate this content through social media and through email and through all the channels that we possibly can. And we've seen a lot of success in blog posts, especially on social media, because that these landing pages can be easily accessible from anywhere. And the second content that we've recently also, I think, getting better and better at is developing videos. So even if we're introducing a new journal or a new offering of a journal, or we would like to put a spotlight on the editors, for example, of a particular journal, we do that in the form of a video, and that really lends itself perfectly to platforms like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook as well. So we also see a big increase in reach of this kind of information if it's presented in the form of a video. So yeah, I'm hoping that the impact of this new forms of content is really capturing attention of the researchers and conveying the information in short time and in an engaging way.
Fantastic. That's great to hear, Sonia. And now we move over to John to look at how the best practices around AOM.
Thank you. Let me just bring up the slides. So I'm gonna skip over the first 3 or 4 slides. They're just pretty much a basic introduction of my role, who we are as an organization, the content that we produce. I had previously mentioned our academic journals and our AOM Insights product, which is our business summaries. And here's a little graphic around our annual meeting, the attendance, some of our secondary meetings, and our strategic questions. And I think best practices, it's really around, how did we as an organization couldn't have done what we've currently done without aligning our digital strategy with our social strategy. And that was really a key takeaway for us as far as a best practice, is that we realized pretty early on that the two were going to exist to complement each other. So any strategy we had or any best practice around content would then obviously flow through to what we were creating around our social media channels. That had to deal with support, encouraging author involvement, looking at our traditional journal authors and how they would be impacted or how they would want to interact with us to do this type of content. And then also the success would mean building the social and content bridge between our traditional journal content and the new content that we were creating. The content was more visual, obviously, but then a best practice for us was thinking about some strategic questions. Who do we want to reach with different types of content? How would that digital content support our authors, our subscribers, and provide value to to multiple new channels? And then what data did we have, internal and external, to support and validate this initiative? I'll tell you a funny little story. When I first thought about insights, I went to my COO and I presented it to her, and she's like, I love this idea. You're going to have to present it to the AOM board. And I looked at her and I plopped down 5 summaries that the Harvard Business Review had done, and they were all AOM authors. So fast forward 2 months later, and it was the easiest argument I ever had to make as far as presenting a presentation to our board, because the value there was we as an organization should be providing this to our authors and not letting other organizations do it and charge for it. So, what we did is we launched Insights. We didn't think of Insights as strictly just a video mechanism. You'll see from this slide, we also engage with Editage to create infographics for our content. Infographics are very successful in our social media channels and with our authors to get the dissemination of their content out. So a subset of the best practices would be to think about, when you look at social media, think about expanding the content that you put on social media. Obviously, a lot of academics, we know that, the character limitations with Twitter, sometimes you're able to put a sentence or two up there. Sometimes it's part of the abstract. But we were cognizant of that when we put together our digital content strategy. And a best practice for Insights meant that when I talked to the individual on our team who was writing the Insights content, I said to him specifically, we need one sentence that starts off every summary that I can then push out to social media. So if you go on to aom.org/insights and look at the summaries, you'll see that the first sentence or two is really what I use and what a lot of our authors use to push out that content. So we don't have to ask the authors to create that. We create that for them. And that first 2 sentences answers the question of, why do I care about this research and how can I use it to manage better? And we specifically built that in as a best practice. We didn't want to create something that we would then have to look at and say, okay, how do we then use this content within social media? We wanted to do both at the same time. And then this slide also shows the work that we've been doing for Editage around research briefs. So our summaries are shorter, 1-page, 2-page, 1,000-word, 1,500-word summaries of our academic content. And that opened up a huge opportunity for us to use research briefs to align another set of content around our academic work. And it's also important to realize that best practice, as I think Sonia had mentioned, when we first started thinking about this, 9 out of 10 authors said, I don't have time to do this. And when we sat down and thought about it, we realized that 1, that was true, and 2, to some extent, we didn't want to rely on them to do this. And that doesn't sound right, but and I'll explain it, is that what we found was being able to translate academic content to the practitioner market is a defined skill. And some of our authors have that skill and some of them don't. And it actually really worked out well because, as Sonia was saying, our authors that said, I don't have time to do this, our response was, we're not asking you to. We'll coordinate this with you. You'll be involved in the process. Our digital strategy director, who reports to me, works with our authors and coordinates the summaries. They see any research briefs that are created. They see any infographics that are created, and they eventually sign off on all this material. And I think that a huge best practice to push forward is that you don't want to lose that connection of whatever content you're creating with the author. It helps them feel vested in the content. They are very familiar with the process. They are engaged, and that only helps. When you push out the content, you've got another mechanism there within the author. And a lot of our journals are multiple authors. So one piece of content distributed by 4 authors within their social media groups, that could be hundreds of thousands of people. We could never, as an organization, duplicate that without the help of the authors. So best practice, again, keep the author involved in the process from start to finish. They feel vested, and they'll help you disseminate the content. We are doing other stuff. Academy of Management Discoveries is our first online journal. Every article that Discoveries published gets a whiteboard. So a whiteboard is an animated video around the abstract where a hand comes up and draws the concept around the article. Those have been great to push out through social media. They are relatively more expensive, and we do that for AMD because there are only typically four or five articles per issue. But again, the authors are involved in that process. They work with the animated team to create that, and they end up pushing it out, and it's become a valuable mechanism for us as an organization. And then lastly, we also have a number of our journals do podcasts. So AMLE, which is our learning and education journal, did a podcast series around COVID. So about 2 weeks ago, we put out most academic journals put out what they call a call for papers around a special issue. About a month ago, we put out a call for questions, and we said, how does the current environment impact how you teach your students? We got about 60 or 70 questions. And then the editor and my team put those questions in a series of podcasts, and we pushed that out last week. So it's another best practice is don't be too confined with what you've already set up as a digital strategy. Be adaptable. And I think one of the things that we took away with is that the more adaptable you become, the more able you are to talk to themes that come up quicker, rather than being stuck in the academic realm of we publish content that's been submitted, reviewed maybe a year or two ago. So to some extent, our digital strategy and our strategy around social media has helped us adapt to being more innovative and more timely with the content that we push out. But there are also complications. We're not done yet. We push out a lot more content via social media channels, a lot more digital content, but we haven't answered the engagement question yet. Our users go to our websites, our users go to our social channels, they like the content, they sometimes comment about it, but there's not that sense of engagement where there's a continuous comment around the content we're pushing out. So we haven't gotten there yet. We're a lot better at doing it than we were, say, a year or two ago. But the next step is to really help our authors, help those disseminating our content, who are not just academics anymore, view the Academy and our content as a place to go to have a discussion around our research findings and to be engaged with the content. So that's a little bit around our best practices, a little bit around challenges that we see coming forward. But I think the main best practice for us was, again, to keep that line open with our authors, make it a collaborative effort with our authors. It helps vested, it helps them see that there's a value in publishing with our journals. And it's increased the number of our submissions. And also it's increased the impact of those articles that have accompanying research briefs, summaries. We can and we do have data that shows that articles that get summaries and research briefs and infographics are getting cited more. And at the very least, that's a huge message to send out to our authors.
Yeah. So that's interesting, the use, the way authors are being engaged by AOM to be able to publish more with AOM in that sense.
Absolutely.
And I have a recording from Thomas. Thomas has been having some technical difficulties in terms of being able to, so we recorded this video from earlier. I'll just share that.
Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Wang, Marketing Director of Wiley China from Beijing. Today is my big pleasure to be part of this virtual event and share some views about digital marketing and social marketing and the COVID-19 environment. In these slides, I share a little bit of views about China digital landscape for academic publishing. For Wiley China, our digital marketing has reached out to each step of our authors' value chain. Fourth step of pre-publishing, so far we have offered webinar programs, social media outreach to engage and influence our Chinese authors. Our footprint has covered topics such as how to do your research in labs, how to select journals, how to write scientific articles, cover letters, and also language polishing skills. Fourth step of post-publishing, we promoted the researchers' work and grow authors' impact via social media, digital products. We also partner with the leading research online communities and digital platforms. We also promote the work through online publishing seminars and research symposia. In addition, the marketing team, we are focused on shift digital marketing from demand-driven to demand and data-driven. We partnered with new technology platforms to strengthen our author profiling function so that we can have a better understanding the author behavior, author demand virtually. In addition, we grow the impact and the effectiveness of digital marketing with academic communities intensely. And these slides, I'll talk a little bit about how Wiley China team reach out to our authors and build communities. So currently, our marketing colleagues has profiled authors by early career researcher and established researchers. We developed different strategies and tactics based on their needs and their features, which were aligned by our marketing and editorial colleagues. We also engaged our authors, researchers, and key opinion leaders by subject communities and developed Wiley community by prioritized titles with tailored plans. We conducted some high-profile events to engage and influence the communities. For example, we conducted a peer reviewer training workshop by partner with ISTIC, which represents Institute of Scientific and Technical Information of China. We also conducted a small 15th anniversary virtual seminar recently, and a COVID-19 virtual seminar is upcoming. So for post-COVID, what about the roles of digital and social marketing? So as everyone has seen that COVID-19 has brought some challenges to the industry, to the market, but meanwhile, it created some new needs and opportunities for this market. For example, all our physical marketing activities has been shifted to digital and to online, which has driven a lot of digital and social new initiatives so far. Our researchers, our editors, and marketers have also realized more advantages, benefits by going online and go digital. Post-COVID-19 effect, to my point of view, it will continue. But it will motivate marketers to escalate digital and social marketing advancement and to better leverage time and budget cost for physical activities for future. The world has become smaller, and the engagement with our researchers, authors has been closer because of the digital and social marketing. That's all my views for today. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, before we wrap up and go into the Q&A session, I just want to ask one question. In the post-COVID world, how do you see digital and social impacting academic publishing? Let's start with you, Sonia. Are you there? I think Sonia seems to have lost connection as well. Dominique, shall you answer this question?
I think one of the things that is strikingly different now is that we can't travel to conferences anymore. And we're doing this now in a virtual conference. And even though we have some glitches, I think it is really an amazing way to share research. And I think this will probably stay, and it will make it a lot more accessible for people to take part in conferences. And it will really democratize sharing your research and being on a panel. For people, we have a lot of publishers from countries, a lot of authors and editors from countries where it's not always so easy to get a visa to enter another country, or there may be budget reasons. And I think especially for those authors and editors, it would be a great thing if we had a lot more virtual conferences, because it would really allow them to take part in that and to increase the impact of their research and talk to their peers. But also for groups like if you're a parent with young children and you don't want to travel the whole world, I think right now that is still quite a problem. If you want to be high level up at a university, it's almost obligatory to travel to each and every conference in your field. And I think if a lot more took place digital, then that would also have a great impact in that sense. So I think this is one of the good things that is hopefully here to stay. I also see a big shift within the libraries, where we talked about print books versus e-books earlier. And I think there were a lot of libraries, especially smaller ones, that were still hesitating to move towards an e-version. And there was still, in some areas, a focus on collection building. And I want to have everything in this area in print. And I think we're seeing more of a shift towards making sure that your patrons have access to what they need when they need it. And I think that is a big difference too. So I think in that sense, this could really, this new digital shift that is forcing us all to do everything digital may also bring us some good things in the end.
Thank you for that, Dominique. Thomas, you had some very interesting points about conferences and Chinese authors and international authors.
Yes, actually, a lot of conference, I think before the coronavirus crisis, international conferences. The speakers, the audience are from America, Europe, and APAC. But under this coronavirus impact, we have to shift it to online. But for online virtual events, Wiley recently conducted in China, some speakers audience are still from APAC, from America, although we have the challenges for time zone. But I think so far we have a wider audience participated some events, and the speakers hosts, they are very, so far I think the results, the outcome, they are very happy. And they want to continue such kind of a virtual engagement and programs.
John, what are the, thank you for that, Thomas. John, what do you think are the opportunities that COVID brings to academic publishing in terms of digital and social?
I think for us as an organization, it's been around what Dominique has mentioned, is we were never really as an organization centered around collections per se of our content. And to some extent, we were behind the trend with that for, we have as an organization, we have our journal editors, and last year we appointed our first collections editor, and that editor and his team will be looking at different ways to present our content to the community and different and faster ways. And unfortunately, we didn't have that up in time for what's going on now. We were able to put a page up with relevant COVID content that we produce in lieu of having that editor involvement. But for us as an organization, this is going to have broader effect of us being able to put different types of content forth to our academic community. So we still publish under the silos of our traditional journals. They do very well, obviously. We do insights, we have that content. So the next step is looking at those collections of content based on subject areas, based on topics, and really being able to push that out to market quicker than we necessarily do with our journal content. It's hugely important for us to be able to do that. We have a lot of content in our archive that has been there since a journal article has been published that hasn't been looked at since then. So there's a huge opportunity for us as an organization to look at doing that type of collections type of content. I think another secondary thing we've learned is that we didn't have in place a rapid review process for articles that we knew were relevant to what is going on now in the world. And we started implementing that, and we were able to implement that at the journal level. But I think having a more structured, rapid review process around our content at any given time is really going to be essential for us as an organization, because it'll help us designate articles that we have that are in the review process or somewhere other than not being published, to push those forward quicker and put them through the review process quicker than a traditional AOM journal would go, an article would go through, based on what we need, what services we need to provide to our authors, and what content we need to push out to our academic community, to our academic and practitioner community. So those are two of the main points that we'll take forward, is being more proactive with our collections, getting that up and running sooner, and also looking at our review process and our traditional operational processes around our journals, and what of them that we can change to get content out quicker. And those are pretty much two of the main takeaways from what's been going on.
Interesting. From pandemic arises opportunity. Sonia, do you have a similar view on this?
We've seen with COVID-19 that it really helped us sort of mobilize our forces internally, and we put together a COVID-19 research center of all the research relating to that virus that is now really available for research around the world. And I wasn't personally involved in that project, but it was very positive for me to see that we could put something together really quickly and for the benefit of researchers around the world. So I think what John was saying about the speed, increasing the speed of output or creating content quicker and putting it out there, I think definitely it's also something we've seen on we are challenged to do as well, because we do need to act quickly. And another thing that I've noticed in our industry is the importance of now online learning and online events. Of course, it's my personal opinion, but I had a feeling that before online courses were kind of viewed as addition to your offline and sort of regular career development. While now in these circumstances, I think the course that younger researchers take on our platform or other publishers' platforms are viewed as just as important, or it's so we as a publisher we do have to focus on delivering the best content that we can, the best tools that work, and help researchers in their career development, because there's just no offline events and courses going on right now. So this is a huge responsibility and also a huge privilege.
So thank you for that, Sonia. What I'm hearing is three things. One, I'm hearing is the unbundling of content, okay, as per interest areas, as per topics, and so on. The second thing I'm hearing is online conferences, which is going to make the participation far more democratic and probably cut costs and save the environment. The third thing is a move towards online learning. So before we wrap up, I'll have very quickly two questions. One is from Stuart Tucker. He asks, how does the industry address the rise of WeChat in China, which has become a fundamental part of the country, but a purely mobile experience? I think this question is for Thomas, but possibly also other people who want to enter the China market. Thomas?
Yes, I think for publishers, WeChat for next 2 or 3 years still the main portal that we engage the young generation researchers. But based on building on the WeChat, I think there's a lot of tools and the platform they are developing by some local technology companies. For marketing perspective, digital marketing perspective, I think it's critical for us to partner with them to explore more services or more analysis functions to better understanding our young generation researchers, so that for marketing and editorial side perspective, we can better provide better service and products to the authors and researchers. That's my personal point of view.
Interesting. One of the very interesting trends in this business is this. Before this, I used to handle news, and most of the news consumption was on the mobile. whereas academia is still
Yeah.
the bulk of the consumption is on the desktop or the laptop. So it'll be very interesting to see how that entire thing moves, especially as publishers move to other territories like China to India. Dominique?
Yeah, I think we see mobile growing a lot. If we look at the traffic on our website and how people are accessing research, over the years we see continuous growth in the mobile version. And I think especially in these regions, that will become more and more vital, but in other areas as well. I think we all see how we're using our mobile phones more and more to do everything. And I think we're also sort of losing the barriers between what we're doing privately and professionally. So we're on our mobile phone, and one instance you're looking at research, perhaps on Brill.com, and the next moment you're doing something on Instagram, and that's shifting and blending much more. And I think that's also because of mobile.
Absolutely. So the last question I have, it's actually for John, and it's a very short answer. Do you pass on the cost of developing summaries and infographics onto the authors? This is from Gwen Wirtz.
Absolutely not. It's a service we provide to them, and it's part of my role is creating a budget internally to use to provide that service to our authors. Now, obviously, like I mentioned before, we can't push it out for every author. If we eventually get to there, then we may look at some way to subsidize those costs. But as it exists now, it's a benefit to authors that we incur the charges for.
Thank you for that, and thank you everybody. Thank you, John Pescatore. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for being participants on this fantastic conversation around digital and social and how it's transforming academic publishing in today's day and age. It was fantastic having you here.